Back in the early 1900s, New York City was changing fast. The streets were filling up with immigrants chasing dreams, escaping poverty, and building lives from scratch. But hiding in that mix were whispers of something darker. There was a new kind of fear creeping through neighborhoods like Little Italy, where shopkeepers would receive letters with a black hand drawn in ink and a simple message: pay up or your business goes up in flames. Bombs started going off in bakeries. Men in long coats started knocking on doors late at night, collecting debts that nobody really owed. The NYPD didn't know how to deal with it. Most of the officers didn't speak Italian, had no idea what the letters meant, and couldn't tell the difference between an honest worker and a made man. So they did something the public wasn't supposed to know about. They built a secret unit, a group of men who could go places the others couldn't. They called it the Italian Squad, but what it really was a ghost team. A squad that didn't wear uniforms, didn't operate out in the open, and whose job wasn't just to make arrests, but to make problems disappear. At the center of it all was a man named Joseph Petrosino. He was short, stocky, and never smiled for the press, but he had more grit than a dozen beat cops combined. Born in Italy, raised on the streets of New York, he knew both worlds. He could blend in with the working class and sit down across from killers without flinching. Petrosino understood one thing better than anyone else. If you wanted to stop the Black Hand, you couldn't fight it with paperwork. You had to move in silence, just like they did. So that's what he built, a squad that spoke the language, walked the walk, and could vanish just as fast as the gangsters they were hunting. They didn't advertise their presence. Most cops didn't even know where the Italian Squad worked out of. It wasn't about badges and protocol, it was about results. And those results? Let's just say a lot of names stopped showing up in the crime blotters around that time, because they were gone. The Italian Squad didn't take names and issue warnings. They watched, they listened, and when the time was right, they made their move. Sometimes it was a quiet arrest in the middle of the night, no fanfare. Sometimes it was an unmarked boat leaving the harbor with a man in cuffs bound for Palermo. Other times, there was no paperwork at all. Just a name scratched out in a notebook, a face nobody saw again, and a storefront that suddenly felt safer. The NYPD never admitted to these disappearances. The newspapers didn't report them. But if you talk to the right old-timer, they'd tell you, those guys didn't just run away. They were removed. Clean, quiet, no blood in the streets, no bullets in broad daylight, just gone. That's how Petrosino wanted it. That's how he kept the fear in the right direction. Petrosino was a legend in his own time. He'd dress up like a dock worker, sneak into backroom poker games, or pose as a street cleaner just to overhear whispered plans. He carried no ego, no swagger, just a revolver, a notebook, and a quiet rage against the men who preyed on their own people. He saw how the Italian community was being painted as criminal by the newspapers, how everyday immigrants were getting harassed just because the cops were too lazy to separate the guilty from the innocent. So Petrosino made it personal. He wanted to clean it up from the inside, using his own people to root out the cancer. But what made him dangerous wasn't just that he spoke the language, it was that he understood the codes, the way power moved, the way silence was enforced, and he used that knowledge to fight fire with fire. You show up in the dark, you whisper your message, and you leave no trace. That was how the squad worked. That was how they made sure the next bomb never went off. But it couldn't last. In 1909, Petrosino made a trip that would change everything. He sailed to Sicily on a mission to track down the source of the Black Hand extortion network. He didn't tell the public, didn't broadcast it to the press, but somebody leaked it. And in Palermo, under the hot Sicilian sun, Petrosino was gunned down in the street, 5 shots to the body. No witnesses, no arrests, just another dead man in a country that knew how to bury its secrets. Back home in New York, the squad was shaken. Their leader was gone. The one man who held the line between justice and chaos was silenced. And with him, a piece of the Italian squad's soul disappeared. The message was clear. Even the toughest cop in New York wasn't untouchable. For a while, the squad went quiet. The city shifted. The gangsters adapted. But the model Petrosino built didn't die. It just went deeper underground. Years later, during Prohibition, another man picked up the torch. His name was Michael Fiaschetti, and he brought the Italian squad back with new tactics and new enemies. Now, they weren't just fighting extortion, they were dealing with bootleggers, smugglers, and mafia bosses who had gotten smarter, richer, and more connected. But Fiaschetti kept the same playbook. No uniforms, no warnings, no mercy. He didn't kick down doors for the press. He knocked once, and that was it. If you didn't cooperate, you disappeared. Maybe you were on the next boat back to Naples. Maybe you were buried in a prison file nobody ever found. Or maybe you ended up in the river, name never spoken again. People talk a lot about corruption in the NYPD, and yeah, it's true. Plenty of cops took bribes, looked the other way, even worked for the mob themselves. But the Italian squad? They weren't bought. They couldn't be. They operated in the shadows, sure, but their mission was clean. Protect the community by any means necessary. And that meant sometimes stepping outside the rule book, sometimes doing things that didn't make it into the monthly reports. You want to know how serious it got? There were cases, real cases, where suspected killers were picked up, questioned, and then nothing. No arraignment, no paperwork, no phone calls, just silence. And when the reporters came asking, they got told the guy must have skipped town. But those close to the scene knew better. The squad didn't need to make headlines. They made statements, final ones. Over time, the name faded. The Italian squad dissolved, got absorbed into bigger departments, new bureaus with flashier names, the Street Crime Unit, the Organized Crime Task Force. But none of them hit the way Petrosino's squad did. None of them were that precise, that personal. Today, you walk past the old NYPD headquarters on Center Street, and you'd never know that inside those halls, men once planned midnight operations that never made the news but saved entire neighborhoods. You'd never know how many names were crossed out not by bullets, but by silence. You'd never know how many gangsters vanished in a city that never stops moving because somebody in a plain suit decided enough was enough. That's the story nobody tells, not because it's made up, but because it's too real, too quiet, too effective. These weren't vigilantes. They were officers, sworn in, trained, and sent out with one mission: fix the mess before it spread. And the way they did it? That's where the mystery lives. Because if a guy disappears in a city of 8 million, who's gonna notice? If a storefront stops paying protection money and nobody gets hurt, who's gonna ask why? That's what the Italian squad did. They didn't just arrest gangsters, they erased them, tactfully, permanently. So next time someone tells you the NYPD's always worked by the book, ask them about the Italian squad. Ask them about Joe Petrosino. Ask them about the names that vanished, the bodies never found, the guys who left for a haircut and never came back. Because in New York, sometimes justice doesn't come with a badge. Sometimes it comes with a whisper. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it comes before the next bomb goes off.